Get ready to rumble. Schilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Schilling.
Welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Remember, your direct support makes our show possible, and you can directly support this podcast by visiting shillingshow.com and then clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page to make a monthly contribution. We appreciate your support. The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast welcomes Leo Hohmann, independent journalist and blogger, author of the 2017 book Stealth Invasion. And today's topic, the elite are preparing for the great collapse of civilization. And Leo Hohmann, welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed.
Thanks, Rob, for having me.
When we talk about the great collapse, people might be confused with the Great Reset. And so let's start out by comparing these two things and really what is the great collapse that you're referring to?
The Great Collapse is what we're seeing unfold right now before our very eyes. It's the collapsing of the traditional American system, the traditional economic system, which is the dollar-based capitalist system where the dollar serves as the standard currency for the world, where capitalism has been the dominant economic mode of exchange throughout the world. And it also incorporates not just economics, Rob, but also social standards, social constructs and mores that we're all used to in the Western world, which are undergirded by really biblical Judeo-Christian values. You know, do unto others as you would have done to yourself. Fair day's work for a fair treating your employees with respect. The things that all kind of met their apex starting after the Civil War and the Industrial Revolution, where things, were kind of dicey for a while, but improved gradually since then. And, it really led, I guess, to the middle-class lifestyle that so many of us got used to in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and into the early 2000s. But that all seems to be gradually being eroded now. All of these things that American society and Western civilization have been based on for decades now.
So, Leo, I think it's very instructive for people to understand how this happened. In other words, we had this system. It was biblically based. America prospered under it. But how did we become disconnected?
I think people got a little too comfortable, perhaps. We started having our eyes diverted from what's really important in life: family, children, church, God, the Ten Commandments, which serve as the sort of, I guess you would say, unifying factor for all of this. Whether you're Jewish, Christian, or even some of these other religions, you basically adhered to that standard of values. But it's been gradually eroded over the last, I would say 50 years for sure. You could even go back easily about 75 years and find where these ideas were coming under attack in the United States and in Western Europe. It was sort of the Long March, as they call it. Antonio Gramsci, who was the father of modern communism, he was an Italian activist, revolutionary, and he, kind of disagreed with Leninism and said, you're never going to come to gain global power through the Leninist system where you violently try to overthrow the ruling establishment. You have to infiltrate their institutions and take the long road, play the long game. And maybe over 50 to 100 years, we'll end up in all of the seats of power. We'll take over without basically firing a shot. And that's what we can see has happened, Rob, over the last decades, where the left has infiltrated all the key positions of power and authority in our culture, whether it be the media, the university, the corporate boardrooms, Even the churches are now having leftists and leftism preached from the pulpits in many of American churches today, where, they've gone full bore with the LGBT normalization, transgenderism now. It really is shocking, but we shouldn't be shocked because Antonio Gramsci gave us the playbook almost 75, 80 years ago in the 1920s.
You mentioned a very key word, and I want to spend at least a couple of minutes on this, Leo. You mentioned children, and we see what's happened in this country since Roe v. Wade back in 1973, the diminishing value of what's God's greatest gift to humanity, which is the next generation in children, and yet we're throwing them away, and we're doing it now in a way that's exhibiting pride. Many people are proud of their abortion. How can a society exist that kills its own children?
It can't. It certainly cannot for very long. And so the day that we started saying that abortion is okay was the day that we started living on borrowed time. And I'm frankly surprised that God has been as gracious as he has been with this country. I think it's up to 63 million babies now have been aborted since that Roe v. Wade decision came down in 1973. And yet, we still have the chance to turn back, I feel like. Whether we will or not, I don't know. I'm starting to see some younger people getting a clue and saying maybe our parents' generation didn't do a very good job, and maybe even our grandparents didn't do a very good job in watching over, being watchmen on the wall for their culture and their society, and being on guard against these anti-biblical concepts that crept in. Some of them are on fire really for God in ways that our generation and our parents' generation wasn't, sadly to say. They were more interested in improving their lot in life and their financial position in life than they were in improving their connection with their Creator.
Indeed, it's true. And so I share your concern that America is heading towards a civil war. I'd be curious to see who you see these sides are. What are the two sides, and what do they want for America?
Well, that's an interesting question, Rob, because it seems to me, and this is just the way I look at it, that if we do have a civil war, the people killing each other won't really be the ultimate enemies of each other, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the ones who are the ultimate enemies, who are driving this country toward a civil war, will likely not come under fire and will likely not find their homes come under attack because they're isolated. Nobody even really knows where they are. They're the what I call the globalist technocrats, the 1% of society who are the top investors with BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard and Fidelity and these big asset management companies. They sit on interlocking boards of directors for all of America's biggest companies and biggest banks. They're the ones who are invested own the majority of stock in all of these really what have become demonic corporations like Facebook and Twitter and Google and all of these companies that are so not only anti-God, but anti-American. And I don't see them I don't see them being really a big player in the Civil War. I think they're stoking Americans, everyday Americans, middle class and working class. I think they're stoking this hatred of each other. It's racial. They're stoking race relations to be worse than they've been in 50 years. They're stoking social class warfare to be worse than it's been. I don't know that it's going to fall neatly along geographic lines like it did in the first Civil War, Rob, but I do feel like there's just stoking all of these divisions, whether it be class warfare or racial hatred, to the point where people are going to be blaming their problems on whoever the scapegoat of the day is in the mainstream media or the social media. For instance, Antifa and Black Lives Matter. I don't see those as the ultimate enemy of what's going on in America. Those are simply pawns. Those are Lenin would call them useful idiots, but they are not the ones sitting in the boardrooms of the biggest banks and the biggest corporations in this country driving us towards civil war.
It did not seem to be the case, Leo, for a long time, at least when I was observing, that these big corporations were demonic in nature, but I think you used the word advisedly. And so what are we seeing here? Are we actually seeing a demonic game plan for the future of the United States and the future of the world playing out via these corporations?
I think so, and I think it's emanating from international bodies such as the United Nations and the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum especially, Rob, has taken a much bigger role in global affairs. They hold a conference every year in Davos, Switzerland, and Klaus Schwab is the founder director of this entity. He founded it in I believe it was the early 1970s, and nobody really ever heard of it until recent years. They were always kind of in the background. Now they've become much more visible, much more out there. Their website is very active, and if anybody doubts that this is an evil entity, all they need to do is two things. Read Klaus Schwab's books and go to the World Economic Forum website and thoroughly check out that website. And if you don't come away with the impression that, this entity is dishonest because the language they use is in many ways the opposite of the agenda that they push. They are pushing for transgenderism. They are pushing for the end of private property. They say you will own nothing, have no privacy, and be happy in the world, the ideal world that they're trying to create. Now, that was on a video that was since scrubbed from their website, but many people have captured that video, and if you type it into your search engine, World Economic Forum, own nothing and be happy, you will see where you can still watch that video on other sites from people who downloaded it before it was scrubbed. And so this really gives you the idea. They talk about inclusive capitalism and stakeholder capitalism and public-private partnerships. These are the things they talk about. But if you read the books of Klaus Schwab, the founder and director, he talks about a system that to me sounds almost like the beast system described in Revelation, where people will have no privacy. He talks about transhumanist ideal world where he talks about in the, quote, fourth industrial revolution, your digital, physical, and biological identities will be merged together in one identity. He talks about brain implants where people will become more like machines and machines will become more like people. If this is not demonic, Rob, I don't know what is.
The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast will continue in just a moment with Leo Hohmann.
Associated Press award-winning journalist, Rob Schilling.
BorderHawk.news is a one-stop shop with the latest news about immigration nationalism and globalism. The BorderHawk staff daily curates immigration news stories and, in the fashion of the Drudge Report, updates the site with cutting-edge content and original first-class commentary. BorderHawk.news highlights national and international media reports, tweets, and nuggets buried in local news blurbs, polls, video clips, and policy research. BorderHawk is pro-legal immigration, pro-rule of law, but against an unsecure border as countless Americans have suffered violence at the hands of criminal illegal aliens. And an increasing number of Americans are concerned about how mass migration affects their daily life. BorderHawk.news will remain on the forefront of the immigration issue with a buffet of info to read, evaluate, and share. Bookmark BorderHawk.news. Add them on social media at BorderHawkNews on Twitter.
Community-supported investigative journalism. Schilling Show Unleashed.
The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Leo Hohmann is our guest, independent journalist and blogger. His book in 2017, Stealth Invasion. We're talking today about the preparation of the elite for the great collapse of civilization. And so let's go to what we're witnessing around us right now, which is the supply chain collapse. We're hearing a lot about it. We're seeing the empty shelves, and they're trying to tell us, Joe Biden told us recently that this is only a 2% deviation from before COVID hit, which I don't think anybody believes. But what is driving this collapse?
A lot of things. We already had a shortage of truckers, Rob, about 80-some thousand down in the number of truckers that we needed for a healthy supply chain 2 years ago. And it's only gotten worse with the whole COVID pandemic. Now we are seeing vaccine mandates kicking in on both sides of the U.S.-Canadian border, where the Canadians slapped a vaccine mandate on truckers coming into Canada effective January 15th. And on January 22nd, just a couple days ago, Biden administration did the same thing for Canadian truckers coming into the U.S. Truckers are very upset. A lot of them are striking, calling out, doing protests. I think there's a big protest scheduled for this week going up to Ottawa, Canada. And this is going to make an already shaky supply chain that has been weakened from coronavirus even more obviously about to collapse. We're seeing pictures of Walmarts around the country with just really sparse goods on some of their sections of their store shelves. I've seen it in my community. And if Walmart, they have the most robust purchasing power of just about any retailer in the United States and North America. So if they're having trouble keeping their store shelves fully stocked, I can't imagine what it would be like being a smaller grocery store chain right now, getting certain items, eggs, certain meats. They're all disappearing from store shelves. And it's only going to get worse if these vaccine mandates continue to be enforced.
So I look at this from an economic perspective and wonder, these businesses, if they have no merchandise to sell and practically very few people to sell it, no one wants to work. Doesn't this create its own downhill slide of businesses just collapsing? That would be unless the government is propping them up somehow.
It does. And again, this fulfills the mission of the World Economic Forum. You know, every year, Klaus Schwab at his conference, he's hosting who? He's not hosting small businessmen or entrepreneurs. He's hosting the world's CEOs of the biggest corporations in the world. You know, the whole coronavirus pandemic has worked out marvelously for these large corporations. Amazon has seen record profits. Walmart last year had, I believe, record profits. Big box stores like that and online massive retailers like Amazon have fared very well. Who have the lockdowns and restrictions really hurt? Of course, it's been the, quote, non-essential businesses, which are your smaller businesses, your medium-sized businesses. And these are the type of businesses that really make our economy flourish. This is what made America, America. Anybody could go out and start a business. If you didn't like the situation in your employment, you could break off from your employer and start your own business and compete with that employer. This is getting harder and harder to do under the, quote, new normal. And Klaus Schwab said, we're never going back to the old normal. And so they're doing everything in their power to make sure things don't return to the old normal. Now, they've got a problem on their hands. That is, a lot of people are starting to wake up, Rob, and find out that everything they were told about this virus and the reasoning behind these draconian restrictions and these mandates was not exactly true. We were told a lot of lies and a lot of half-truths about the virus from the very outset. They tried to paint it as something that was like a death sentence if you got it. They played down the fact that it was 99% recoverable. If you came down with this virus, there was a 99% chance that you would recover. They played up the so-called fact, that asymptomatic people could be super spreaders, meaning you're not coughing, you're not sneezing, you don't even know you're sick, but you're infected with this invisible virus, and you're out there spreading it. And that made what? That made everybody afraid of their friends and their family members. So there was a lot of division going on among family members and close friends. I experienced a lot of that in my own life. If you want to take over and transform a society, what do you need to do? You need to detach people from their communications network with their closest family and friends. Make people afraid of each other. This virus was marvelously successful in accomplishing that. And that's what the Great Reset is all about. People don't need to take my word for it. Klaus Schwab said that the coronavirus presented a, quote, narrow window of opportunity to transform the way we live, work, and live in our society, our economic system, our social system. Everything, he said, needed to be transformed, and this virus provided the opportunity to do that.
It seems that there's other damage that is yet to be discovered here, although we know it's coming, Leo, and that would be the psychological damage. We're already seeing increased suicide, drug use, and so forth, but this generation of children being raised with muzzles on their faces who can't even learn how to speak because they can't see other people's mouths move. They're forming no bonds with other people because they're isolated. This is going to be a massive wave of trouble for this society.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. It just breaks my heart whenever I'm out in public and I see parents having their little children muzzled with these face diapers, and their own faces covered. These children are growing up without the essential social interaction of seeing people's faces. Your face is what communicates emotion. Your face is what communicates compassion. Your face is what communicates many other emotions in the entire human ethos. Without being able to see people's faces, just think if you are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old and you're not able to see adult faces around you, what kind of psychological impact is that going to have on that child? You're right, Rob. We don't even know all of the impacts yet that that's going to have and what these children are going to grow up to be like, living with that type of abuse. And what's sad is these parents don't see it as abuse. They actually think they're protecting their child from something. But those are the ones, Rob, I call them true believers. They believe everything this maniacal Dr. Fauci tells them. They believe everything that comes out of the CDC. And it's really, really sad. It truly does just breaks my heart.
You have noted that you've heard the word impact a lot and that we ought to be bracing ourselves for impact. In fact, Christian believers that you know have been having dreams about this. Tell us, please.
That's absolutely true. I've had a couple of friends of mine who, one in particular, had a dream about where she was being told that believers need to brace for impact. And then somebody else sent an email out who I'm on their email list, and it was said a similar thing. So I got online and I Googled it, actually used DuckDuckGo, not Google, and I found that this is a recurring dream, a recurring vision that a lot of believers are having. So I think it's something that we need to pay attention to. I think perhaps it may go back to the fact that this narrative is starting to crumble. This narrative is starting to get away from these globalist technocratic elites that we've been discussing. And if that is happening, if enough people are waking up, and it seems like they are, the crowds are getting larger and larger who are protesting out in cities like Brussels, Belgium, the headquarters of the EU. There was 500,000 people this weekend marching through the streets saying, we're done. We're done with these mandates. We're done with these masks. We're done with these vaccine mandates. We saw people out in Washington, D.C. this weekend. For the first time in America, we had a very large protest against these exact same type of restrictions. As the narrative is getting away from the globalist elites who control the establishment media, the corporate-owned media, the CNNs, the ABCs, the NBCs, and MSNBC type Washington Post and New York Times type media outlets, if they are no longer able to keep the lies alive, then we have to ask ourselves, what is going to be the next move by these globalist elites? I don't think they're just going to suddenly say, you know what, you were right. This virus is not worth clamping down on people's freedoms to prevent, and we're going to let you have all your freedoms back and go back to the old normal. I don't see that happening. They're too far invested. They're too far into their takeover strategy to just turn around and go back to the old normal. And so a tyrant is always most dangerous when they get desperate. And I'm starting to sense Klaus Schwab and his New World Order buddies are getting a little bit desperate. And so we should be on our guard about what's coming next. Will it be a total collapse of the supply chain where people are desperate for food? And, hungry people can easily be manipulated. Will it be that? Will it be the Civil War we talked about? Will it be an international world war? We see things heating up on that front as well with the border crisis in Ukraine. We see that our U.S. government is more concerned about a breaching of the border in Ukraine than they are about the daily breaching of our own border, where tens of thousands are coming in every week through the Mexico-U.S. border from over 100 countries. It's not just Mexicans. It's not just Central Americans. These people are coming from the Middle East, China, everywhere, breaching the U.S. border, but there's absolutely no concern about that. We're concerned about the Ukraine's border, something that has almost no effect on the daily lives of any American. That's what you see in the news right now. So I think that could be one of the flashpoints, if you will, of a world war coming in possible months ahead.
It seems, and finally, Leo Hohmann, that it's time in America for people to set up a parallel system for banking, for economics, for education, for food production, medicine, etc. Is that a realistic goal? And if so, how do we go about it?
I do think it is realistic. When I speak to believers lately, I bring up the scripture out of Revelation that says, "Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins and suffer from her plagues." I really think that we're at the point now, Rob, where we've tried to reform. We've tried to say this public education system, for instance, needs to be fixed and reformed. Does it? Or was it designed to work exactly the way it is? Maybe it isn't broken. Maybe it's working the way it's designed to work. And so I advise people to pull their children out of the public school systems. The same can be said for the banking industry. Who do you buy your goods and services from? If that place you buy a coffee from every morning and pay a $5, $7 for a cup of coffee is saying that people can't go to work there unless they get the jab, maybe you should find another place to buy your coffee. Stop feeding the beast. Start spending your money with people who share your values. Cut off these other evil corporations. There's no reason. I've had to cut off cable, Netflix, all of these things over the last year because I'm tired of spending my money with corporations that are run by people who hate people like us.
Leo, if people want to get a copy of your book, Stealth Invasion, or if people would like to follow your work online, would you tell us how they can be in touch with you?
My website is leohohmann.com. Leo Hohmann, spelled Hohmann. My book has been out for several years now. It came out in 2017, and the hardback version that I was selling on my website is sold out. I believe there is a company that has the rights to the softcover version, and that you find that on Amazon. I'm also on Telegram. That has become my new favorite social media platform, and I'm on Telegram. If you just go on there, if you have the app for Telegram, you can search Leo Hohmann, author/journalist, and you'll find my public channel there on Telegram. I'm also on Gab. I've been kicked off of Twitter. I do have a Facebook page called The Hohmann Report where I post all my articles there as well.
I hope people will look into it. Leo Hohmann, thank you for speaking out boldly, and thank you for sharing your time with us today on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast.
Thank you so much, Rob. My pleasure.
That concludes another edition of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Visit us online at schillingshow.com, where you can directly support this podcast by clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page and making a monthly donation. Your support is essential for the continuation of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Until next time.